Hi everyone, in this video we're gonna create those sort of trails and we're gonna create a variation as well. As you can see here, we've got a bit more contrast and less glow around it, and that one we've got a lot more glow and just a bit more texture data there. And same deal as in the previous videos, we've got a controls here if you wanna slightly different trails, but we are getting really nice distortion here and some really cool highlights. So it might be some of the textures that you actually might need in your project for trails or anything else. It could be even good for swirls. So let's maybe dive into Substance and let's create this graph, and obviously we can later export it as a 3 different trails using RGB a merge node. Anyway, let's dive into Substance and let's create this graph. So I'm gonna start with Perlin noise. However, feel free to start with any other nodes as well. You can start with cells maybe. Actually, let's start with cells, and I'm gonna get the blur node. I'm gonna increase the scale maybe to 6. And now I'm just gonna run it through cross section. It will be gradient mirrored. But as you can see, it kind of sits at the top right now. So what we could do, let's try to invert this. But that one will be at the bottom, but we can run it through levels and bring the values a little bit closer. Okay, so here, and once I start bringing this in, you can see we're kind of getting this in the middle. Now under cross section, you can play with those values and get the trail somewhere in the middle. Maybe the scale is a little bit too much, so maybe 3. And we could get a trail like this. Okay, so that's the one way you could do it. The other way would be obviously with the Perlin noise, and to be honest, Perlin noise always gives me like a really good results for the base trail. So if I want maybe somewhere in the middle, it's just a lot easier with one node. Obviously you can come here down, where's the polygonal option, change the segments, and you can control how many segments you want. I'm gonna go with smooth option and with the Perlin noise for now. Later on at the end we can switch to the different noises and see if we could get a slightly different result with the cross section. Okay. Now let's extract it using the histogram scan. Slightly thicker maybe this time. We can go for the bevel on the minus values. And now let's create the subtraction shapes. Okay, so I'm gonna go for the tile sampler. I'm gonna plug our histogram scan, although I'm just gonna duplicate it here and plug it into the mask input. And under tile sampler, I'm gonna switch it to disks. And go with the random position, and for the map, mask map threshold, I'm gonna maximize it and invert it. I think we're getting too many of those circles, so maybe I'm gonna halve it to 8, and I'm gonna increase the scale of them. And now what we could do, we could either invert this, and we're kind of getting this trail. You can experiment with the amount here. As you can see, you could get some really cool looking trails. So I'm gonna go with 8 by 8 as it was, and instead I'm just gonna use blend. Oops, I'm gonna revert this order, and I'm gonna set it to subtract. As you can see, what we're doing right now, we're just subtracting those shapes from our main trail. And in here, we could just change the scale, randomize it if we wanted to, so we can create various shapes without just single trail. Okay, so that's what we've got. Also, I'm gonna blur it to blend it a bit better. So as you can see, we're getting very soft transitions now with some harsh edges here. Next, I'm gonna use another histogram scan just to extract this shape with a high contrast. And as you can see, we're getting some really cool results with it. Okay, I'm gonna run it through another bevel on the minus values. I think we need a bit more data in this area. So in here, for the tile sampler, I'm gonna go to the position, this position random, and just tweak this a little bit. So we're getting a variation. Okay, maybe something like that. Okay, I'm gonna blur this, maybe with 2. And now I'm just gonna use warp. For the warp gradient input, I'm gonna go with pedaling noise, scale it back down to maybe 8. And in here I'm just gonna put 5, but I think I'll need much less. But I wanna have a slider to see what it actually does to the texture. So I'm gonna have a slight warp here. And next I'm just gonna use multi-directional warp grayscale. I'm gonna copy and paste our pedaling noise, plug it back in, and I'm gonna reduce the scale, maybe halve it to 4. Maybe let's keep it 6. Okay, I'm gonna increase this maybe to 100. Go with chain and maybe 2 for the directions. As you can see, we're kind of warping it nicely to create some really cool random shapes. Let's try different options. So even average give us really good results. What about max, min, and chain? Do you know what? This average gives me really nice gradients, so I'm gonna go with this one instead. And next, I kind of want to add a bit more distortion outside the trail. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna grab maybe our pedaling noise, use it for warp. And in here, I'm gonna go with cells with a small scale. I wanna invert this and maybe extract some shapes using the histogram scan. So we're getting a lot more data here. And let's plug it into warp. Let's maybe invert the order because we wanna actually soft warp using the pedaling noise. I'm gonna increase this value maybe to 10. So I quite like this, but I think our histogram scan is a little bit too much. So I'll go with maybe something like that. And I'm gonna use this for our grayscale. Sorry, for the multi-directional warp grayscale again. But I think I need a bit more data, a bit more glow around it. So what I'm gonna do first, maybe let's blur it with a higher value, maybe 50. And let's blend it back in to our texture. Maybe with 70%. Okay, let's go back to this warp, maybe increase it slightly. Okay, cool. And this one, I think that's really cool. We're getting this very smoky shapes, so I'm just gonna keep it. And now let's see if we can blend or actually use our multiple directional grayscale, a warp grayscale for this. So I'm gonna delete those nodes. That goes here and that goes into our intensity input. And we are getting some really cool distortions, as you can see. Okay, I'm gonna blur this in case it's a little bit too intense. And I think I quite like this distortion. Okay, so I'm just gonna blur it slightly with a very low value, just 1. I'm gonna go with auto levels. And next I'm just gonna bring it with, I'm gonna bring the levels in and the gradient map for the colors. And in here, let's try to add some color to it. And in here, let's try to add a slightly different shade. I'm gonna go with this blue-ish color. And lastly, I'm just gonna add maybe glow to it. I actually want to add a bit more color rather than just white glow. I think the blue might work pretty well. Maybe slightly brighter. Let's play with the glow settings. Okay, so we've got color now. We can also change this to grayscale using grayscale conversion node. And in here, I'm just going to duplicate my levels, plug it into the color, or actually duplicate this, and go under glow and just change it a little bit. So if you need a bit more data, a bit more glow here, you can do that. And for the third trail, you can get a bit more contrast. I'm going to copy the grayscale as well. And I'm going to use RGB merge. To create 3 variations. Okay, so now you got RGB and some values. You can have an alpha if you wanted to. I would just export using 3 and to see which one works best in the engine as a trail. The best thing, you can go to the very beginning where we have our Perlin noise. Just tweak the disorder and you might be getting slightly different trails. Just as a one texture with 3 different contrast variation. You can also change the your noise input as well, and you can get completely different look, which looks pretty cool. So if you look at this, for example, I think it might be a really good trail, and that one as well, but I think this one's got too much contrast, so it might actually require additional trail as a background as well. But it gives you really nice variation that you can use in the engine. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you're gonna try it out and create your own trails in the game engine using those techniques.